6-track.
Wow.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Praveen Skinner, and I'm a Superintendent of Student Achievement with the Thames Valley District School Board. Co-chairing with me this evening is Jeff Vogt, Superintendent of Facility Services and Capital Planning. Also joining us this evening is Ben Puzanoff and Cassandra Harms from our planning team, and Jack Amendolia of Watson and Associates, who is assisting us with this review. Each of the schools involved in this part of the review have attendance area review committee members representing their respective school communities. Welcome to everyone on the call, and thank you so much for volunteering to participate in this extremely important process. Superintendent Vogt will now review the agenda for the evening.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. We're here today to present an initial attendance area review report for Northwest London. The report contemplates potential attendance boundary changes. This meeting is the first step in the public consultation process for this review and is intended to provide school communities with information regarding what is being considered and how to provide the board with feedback, comments, and suggestions. This evening, we will go over some background information, an overview of the attendance area review process, the procedure documents, and the timelines, a review of the roles and responsibilities of the attendance area review committee members. We'll provide you with a presentation of the initial attendance area review report. We'll host a question and answer section, and then we will wrap up our meeting this evening. Cassandra from our planning team will be monitoring the chat box during the discussions today. As some of the questions may be answered through the course of the presentation, we'll answer questions from the members during the Q&A portion of the meeting. We also encourage you to ask questions and seek clarification verbally during that portion of the agenda. With that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to our Manager of Planning, Ben Puznov.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Vogt, and good evening, everyone. Just going to provide a little bit of context regarding how we got to where we are today, and then dive right into providing an overview of the attendance area review process, as well as the procedure document and timelines. So on June 23rd of 2020, trustees passed a motion requesting that the student distribution imbalance across the City of London be addressed pending the results of the 2019-2020 round of the Capital Priorities Program. And that's the province's primary way of funding new major capital work, such as new schools and additions. The overarching feedback that we received from the ministry as part of our conversations regarding that round of the Capital Priorities Program was that the TVDSB should be improving facility utilization within the City of London before we seek capital grants for new schools and additions. Subsequent to those discussions with the ministry, administration did go away and began formulating potential boundary change options for the board's consideration, both in the elementary as well as secondary panels. The initial attendance area review report for elementary schools in London was set to be presented to trustees on November the 23rd of last year. That evening, trustees passed a motion to defer consideration of the London Elementary Panel initial attendance area review report until additional information was made available from the ministry regarding its decision pertaining to last year's round of the Capital Priorities Program. At the time, trustees also requested that administration provide some additional information regarding various French immersion schools in London. On January 25th, a new report was presented to trustees that incorporated the Ministry of Education's most recent capital approvals across the city. At that meeting, trustees also received information regarding the board's French immersion boundaries in the central part of the city. On January 25th, trustees also formally initiated an attendance area review. The review is split up into 5 geographic focus areas across the city, and one such focus area is Northwest London. Before outlining the proposed boundary changes under consideration, we're going to start by providing an overview of this attendance area review process and the role that you as AARC members would play in the process. An attendance area review is a process by which school boards change boundaries to optimize enrollment and balance attendance across specific geographic areas. This is a process that's generally needed because of growing enrollment or declining enrollment, and it's done in order to ensure that optimal learning environments continue to be offered to all of our students. TVDSB does have a specific procedure in place for attendance area reviews, and it's available on our website, www.tvdsb.ca/LAAR is the URL. The website has many other excellent resources, including a Q&A page, as well as interactive maps that illustrate boundary changes for each school involved in the review. Prior to considering an attendance area review, the Board of Trustees receives an initial attendance area review report from the administration, and that report details current and potential attendance areas, current enrollment and accommodations, enrollment projections for the area, current and proposed residential development, as well as community trends, and a potential timeline for implementation. If trustees ultimately initiate the attendance area review process, formal public consultation is then undertaken through the formation of an attendance area review committee and school-level subcommittees, whose feedback and input is considered by trustees as part of the decision-making process. As mentioned, the initial attendance area review report for this particular review was presented to trustees on January the 25th. At this meeting, administration did receive direction to proceed with obtaining public feedback regarding the boundary changes presented in the report. Since the board meeting in January, Volunteers to sit on the Attendance Area Review Committee have been recruited with the help of principals of the schools involved in the review. We'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone again for volunteering to help to lead this important process. Following this evening's Attendance Area Review Committee meeting, AARC members for each school will be asked to host virtual school-level meetings in order to obtain feedback from each school community regarding the boundary changes under consideration. The Attendance Area Review Committee members of each school subcommittee will need to designate a chair and a secretary for their school-level meetings in order to help manage the discussion and to record the feedback. Following the receipt of public feedback from the school communities, administration will review the comments provided and prepare a final attendance area review report. As part of the attendance area review process, members of the public are also provided with the opportunity to make delegations to the Board of Trustees regarding that final report, as well as its recommendations. This is then followed by a decision of trustees at a subsequent board meeting. Once a decision is made, administration will then work to implement the boundary changes in accordance with the timeline that's established by trustees. Up on the screen is an overview of the timeline for this particular attendance area review process. Following this evening's Attendance Area Review Committee meeting, it is expected that the virtual school-level AARC subcommittee meetings to obtain the public feedback will occur in March and April. In accordance with our procedure, there are a number of important dates specifically related to the public consultation portion of this process. April 25th is the deadline for subcommittees to request any additional information that their school communities may require in order to supplement the information contained in the initial attendance area review report that you'll hear about this evening. This information would be intended to assist school communities with evaluating the options under consideration. Administration will be distributing any material that's requested to all school communities involved in the review, so all school communities have the same information when compiling their report. May 9th is the last date on which school-level subcommittee meetings may be held. And finally, May 24th is the deadline for subcommittees to submit their school comment reports regarding their community's input. Administration will be reviewing the public feedback received through the school community reports and assembling that final attendance area review report for trustees' consideration. The presentation of the final report, public delegations, as well as the trustee decision are expected to occur in June of this year. As mentioned, the Attendance Area Review Committee is made up of volunteers from each school that's involved in the attendance area review process, including parents and guardians, chair of the school council, and chair of the Home and School Association if one exists. Attendance Area Review Committee members are vital to the success of the attendance area review process and critical for obtaining feedback regarding the boundary changes under consideration from school communities. In addition to running their respective school-level subcommittee meetings, AARC members are responsible for producing that final subcommittee report that documents the public feedback from the school community. Thames Valley administration staff will be providing Attendance Area Review Committee members with template documents in order to assist subcommittees with running their meetings, which would include agenda and minute-taking documents, as well as a subcommittee report template. Presentation slides that summarize the changes under consideration will also be provided to subcommittees for inclusion in each respective presentation to your school communities. Subcommittees are welcome to supplement the presentation material provided with any additional information as they see fit. TVDSB staff will act as a resource following the meetings if any questions arise or if any additional information is required by the school communities in order to evaluate the changes under consideration. Jack Almendolia will now provide an overview of the boundary changes proposed for this focus area of the review. Jack?
Thanks, Ben, and hello, everybody. So the recommendations regarding this area tonight are really related to new residential growth, enrollment pressures and increases in the area, and ultimately the need for and the approval of a new school. So a new 802 pupil place elementary school has been approved for Northwest London. And as I mentioned, the intention of this new school is to provide enrollment pressure relief primarily for Sir Arthur Currie, but also to provide permanent accommodation for holding zones in this part of the city. And really quickly, for the benefit of all those listening who might not know, a holding zone is an area that's created by the school board. It's really a boundary that you draw around typically a new residential growth area. Typically, the area is going to have, like we mentioned, new residential growth and enrollment pressures. And the school that's closest to these areas typically just doesn't have any more capacity or any more space to accommodate that new growth. So these holding zones are created and the students are accommodated in a school that's as close as possible that has surplus space. And in this case, that school is Old North, and we'll look at that in a couple of slides. So it's really the intention of this new school, just to summarize, is to deal with the enrollment pressures at Sir Arthur Currie and to accommodate those two holding zones denoted on the map by numbers 1 and 2. And the purple area that you see is currently the attendance area for Sir Arthur Currie. So right now, the board is working with the developer in order to acquire land for a new school on the south side of Sunnydale Road, and it's marked by that little green building and the cursor. As part of this process, the board has identified a preliminary attendance area for this new school and as part of this London Elementary Panel attendance area review. The proposed attendance area is comprised of, and we'll look at this in a little more detail in a second, but it's comprised of the land south of Sunnydale Road, north of Fanshawe Park Road West between Hyde Park Road and Tokala Trail, as well as the land south of Fanshawe Park Road West and north of the current Clara Brenton Public School attendance area between Tribalwood Street on the east and Centennial Central Public School attendance area on the west. In terms of the two holding zones that I described, the holding zone denoted by the number 1 would be accommodated or proposed to be accommodated in this new attendance area, obviously because of the proximity to the new school. And the holding area denoted by the number 2 at the far east of Sir Arthur Currie's current boundary is proposed to stay or be accommodated at Sir Arthur Currie. If we move to the next slide, we can look at what I just described in a little bit more detail. So we can see what the proposed boundary looks like in close-up, and that's the area that's highlighted in green. And in addition to that, you can see the holding area that I just described that's highlighted or shown by that red boundary that is being highlighted by the cursor right now. And if we go to the next slide, we get a little bit more of an idea regarding current students and how they're distributed and how they would actually look into these proposed boundaries. So I'll explain what we're looking at. So there is obviously the existing Sir Arthur Currie boundary that's all in the orange. There's the two holding zones that are in the green and purple. And then you can see the solid black lines that denote the proposed boundary between the new school as well as what Sir Arthur Currie's boundary would look like. The circles are showing clusters or concentrations of existing students. So you can see that one of the largest concentrations at about 500 students is located quite close proximity to Sir Arthur Currie, just south of the school. You can see another large circle of about just over close to 320 students, again in that holding area that we described, that would be just south of the proposed new school. And then a couple of other bubbles of about 150, 130 students, also in the proposed boundary of the new school, and then some smaller bubbles, one on the east side in the holding zone we described that on the far east portion of Sir Arthur Currie's boundary, and then another cluster of about 50 students just to the southeast of that larger 500 cluster. So you can see that between the existing clusters of students, that the proposed boundaries are doing a pretty decent job of allocating existing students quite evenly between the two schools, or at least quite evenly compared to the proposed capacities of the existing Sir Arthur Currie as well as the proposed new Northwest. And finally, if we move to the next slide, we'll get a sense of the numbers that I'm talking about and these enrollment pressures and this need for a new school. So if we focus for a minute on the top portion of this table, you can see that Sir Arthur Currie Public School has an on-the-ground permanent capacity of 533. has about 12 portables as of 2021 to accommodate that extra enrollment. And you can see that by 2023, so just a couple of years from now, if there was no new school approved, that utilizations would be approaching well over 200%, about 209%. Going forward to 2028, those utilizations would jump to about 260%, and the school would need, almost 40 portables, about 37 portables to accommodate all that growth. Obviously not realistic. Even when we look at the holding school at Old North, 2021 numbers already over capacity, needs 4 portables to accommodate growth. By 2023, that's going to jump significantly because of the growth occurring in those holding zones to about 155%, and it would need about 11 portables. And then obviously, again, not realistic, but going out to 2028, also about 200% and 20 portables. So again, I think the numbers quickly highlight why the board was approved for a new school, because of the significant enrollment pressures. When we look at the proposed solution with the new school and proposed boundaries, we notice a couple of things. If we focus on Sir Arthur Currie for a second, we can see those rates that are well over 200% drop down to about 120%, and the portables from 26 down to a much more reasonable 5. At Old North, same thing, 155% down to about 76%, in the longer term about 70%. But I do want to mention that Old North is also part of a recommendation from another area. So that surplus space is proposed to be used to deal with accommodation pressures at another school. And then you can see the proposed utilization for the new Northwest London School in 2023, about 824 students compared to capacity of 802. So just over 100% utilization, perhaps 1 portable. And then in the longer term, this is important to point out, we see those rates getting back up, even on an overall basis, looking at these schools, close to 130%. The likelihood is there's sort of 2 scenarios. I mean, enrollment may stabilize, as we sometimes see in some of these new subdivisions, but in all likelihood, based on the projections, based on the information we're looking at, there may be additional capital required to accommodate students in the mid to longer term. But for the short to midterm, we feel that this is a reasonable boundary for the proposed new school, as well as what Sir Arthur Currie's boundary would look like. So at this point, I'm going to pass things back over to board staff for some Q&A. Thanks for your attention.
Okay, we are now ready to begin our question and answer period. If you would like to ask a question, please feel free to type it in the chat or to raise your hand, and I will try to get to the questions in the order they are asked. So we did have a couple questions come in a couple minutes ago. The first one, or they're both from Andrew Clark. So the first question is, do these numbers account for the new development recently approved north of Sunningdale Road at Hyde Park Road?
Thank you very much for the question. Just to clarify, for the individual who asked, are you referring to the development that Auburn Developments has filed on what's known as the Mount Pleasant property? I just want to make sure that we're speaking about the same project.
Yeah, so the deal that the trade that happened to get the school board property is what I'm talking about. So the one that's right at Sunningdale, right at Sunningdale in Hyde Park, north of Sunningdale. So in that north quadrant above 1. Yeah.
So right now, that development has not been approved by the City of London. So I do know that the developer does have planning applications before the city. As you can see from this attendance area, students from that particular development, when the property develops, if it develops, will attend Sir Arthur Currie Public School. And certainly that information will be factored into the projections depending on the density that ultimately gets approved here. So I hope that answers the question.
Are we going to have those numbers before the area review is required?
So that process is outside of our immediate control. So certainly the development application that Auburn has before the city is under evaluation, and the city will make a decision in due course. certainly for the purposes of setting a boundary for the new school, we're certainly confident that the boundaries as proposed are adequate to accommodate both students from South Curry and the new Northwest London Elementary School in the short to medium term. Longer term, certainly, as Jack alluded to earlier, we may have a need for future capital investment depending on development, not only on the site you've just identified there, but also possible future development on the north side of Sunningdale if the settlement area boundary ever expands. I hope that's helpful.
So the second question from Andrew as well is, do these numbers also account for the London District Catholic School Board school that will shift some of those students to that board?
Thank you very much for the question. So board share is certainly a consideration when we're undertaking projections as part of this work. Jack, I'm wondering if you wanted to say a few words about kind of your process in coming up with a boundary recommendation and ultimately how board share factors into that process.
Sure, Ben, thanks. So yeah, as Ben mentioned, it's becoming an increasingly larger component of our methodology in terms of board share. We look at board share in a couple of different ways. We look at it going back to 2001 and looking at participation share relative to the school-age children in the area. And then we also look at it relative to enrollment between the two largest school board providers in the area, which are the two English language, the Thames Valley and the Catholic Board. The question you describe is an interesting one. There's not completely based on data and evidence, but in the school board industry, there's a term sometimes, if you build it, they will come. And so there's always, or not always, but typically we see some shifts in enrollment share when a new school opens. It's shiny and new, and the other school may be at capacity, similar things to what we're talking about. So, I mean, those are really hard things to bake into a defensible enrollment projection. But we do look at like I said, the more tangible data that we can look at and look at those trends. And really, ultimately, what we tend to find is that when there's a public board school being built in this area within a couple of years, is that typically those shifts tend to work themselves out. So we might see, a little bit of a higher shift towards the Catholic board in that school for a couple of years, and then the public board school opens and we see that shift back. So sorry, a kind of long-winded way of saying, yes, we definitely account for those trends. We're pretty confident in sort of the mid to longer term numbers that the participation shares that we've assumed for this area are fairly accurate based on, like I said, sort of those longer term trends. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
So we have one hand up. Angela, go ahead with your question.
Yes, my question is in regards to, obviously the boundary areas include a lot of undeveloped land, even in the current area that is a holding zone. So I was wondering, is there any land that has been designated in these areas to be for schools? And if so, how long does the school board, or what is the process that the school board has to either take that land or not? Because what I would be interested to see is if we're ending up in the same scenario just 4 years from now.
Thank you very much for the question. So we actively monitor all development activity across the district, including this part of the city. At this point, there are no school blocks in any planned subdivisions that are either planned or are actively under construction. We are working, as was mentioned earlier, with a developer to acquire a site on the south side of Sunningdale, so identified with the green icon there on the map, to acquire that site for the purposes of a school. Moving forward, as new developments come online, we will be working with our city partners to make sure that school blocks are considered, particularly if additional development is planned on the north side of Sunningdale at a future point in time. So we're certainly cognizant of the growth in this particular part of the city, and we're planning for it accordingly with our colleagues at City Hall. Hope that's helpful.
Yes, do you mind potentially, or could you guys provide the process of how that is determined in regards to that? Because in the Fox Hollow original development plans, there was a school block. And for some reason, for whatever reason, that was removed. And so I would be interested to know what that process is, I think, to understand for future aspects of development.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Try to keep it as high level here as I can.
Yeah.
So ultimately, the municipality typically does a great job of identifying school blocks. School boards have the option to purchase. The challenge we face is our partner on this work is also the Ministry of Education. So our school board requires permission from the Ministry of Education in order to purchase land and build a new school. So at times, the timeline or the availability of that land expires prior to our ability or permission from the province in order to acquire that land and purchase a new school. So in the case of the Fox Hollow subdivision, that's essentially what happened. Our options to purchase expired prior to us receiving permission from the province of Ontario to purchase that property. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Do you mind telling me how long that time frame is?
Ben, do you want?
That the builder has
I'm going
to
to pass
build
this
it?
one over to. Well, yeah. So I think once development has started and there's a certain threshold reached within that development, there's a 3-year timeline.
3 years. Okay. Thank you.
Our next question is from the chat, from Miranda. If a school is in multiple focus areas, is the AARC required to complete multiple final reports or address both areas in the same report?
Thank you very much for the question. I'm assuming this pertains to Old North Public School. The preference would be to have 2 separate subcommittee reports because the focus areas are different and distinct. So it'd be helpful to have separate documents when trustees do consider the feedback from the school communities. Thanks.
And we have a second question from Miranda in the chat as well. Will any teachers be moved as a result of boundary changes and student redistribution?
Thank you for the question. It will ultimately depend on what the final student enrollment is in comparison to the current FTE, but we do have a staffing process in place to be able to support that if we do need to move teachers around. And that's been process has been in place for a number of years, and we certainly work to support the communities in doing that. But it will really depend on what the final enrollment is in comparison to the number of teachers that are in that school at that time.
Our next question is from Dave. Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we get approval for the new Northwest school, what's the expected opening date for that school?
So we do have approval for this school from the province to move it forward. We're stuck right now just on land acquisition, so we hope to have that resolved. We expect that once land is secured, it's about 42 months before the school opens.
Okay, so then my follow-up to that is if we're already expecting to be at 156% by 2028, should we not be looking at a larger school on this build, or we're going to open and already be over capacity before it even opens its doors?
Thank you for that follow-up question. So one of the things we look at when we're building new schools is our capacity to accommodate them on the sites. So an 800 people place school is already quite a large school that's been approved for the area. In order to seek a larger school, we would essentially have to submit a new business case and forfeit the approval we currently have from the ministry. Certainly it'd be more optimal to pursue additional capital and a more longer term once additional subdivisions are proposed in the area and we have a better handle on kind of the more longer term needs in this part of the community. So certainly we recognize there's a need for additional capital, but that need will likely come in the form of another school or possibly even additions down the road, depending on how many students actually materialize from the new developments. Thanks.
I'm not seeing any more questions right now. Just a reminder that you can type your question in the chat or raise your hand. We have a question from Angela. Go ahead.
A follow-up question to the question that was just asked. So will we be seeking more funding and or whether that's additions or a new school or whatever that is seen to be required earlier than we have this time around? Because based on those projections and when we're really going to be looking to open, we're going to be opening at anywhere from 130 to 150% capacity of the new school. So are we already going to have some of those next things in place behind it happening?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Maybe I'll take it a little more globally. So the province of Ontario allows school boards to apply for new capital, new schools, or major additions about once a year. There's 51 school boards across the province, and that is the process by which all school boards apply for capital. So as Thames Valley, we will certainly be monitoring. We absolutely have see a future need for more capital in this area, and the issue will compound itself if further lands north of Sunningdale are brought into the growth boundary. So we'll actively be watching this. We'll actively be pursuing opportunities to apply for new capital. The reality is we now live in a community where growth is happening at a very, very rapid rate, and this is going to challenge school capacity for many years to come. Hope that answers your question.
Our next question is from the chat, from Edward. If it is a 42-month timeline for the new school, is it the case that holding zone 1 and 2 are likely to remain as holding zones at Old North until the new school is built?
Thank you very much for the question. So we do have some interim accommodation measures in place right now to manage growth within the Sir Arthur Currie attendance area as well as the holding zones. So holding zone 1 being the Fox Hollow West subdivision, new students from this particular development, new families, will be attending Wilfrid Jury Public School starting next year. So essentially siblings of existing students that are attending Old North Public School will continue to attend Old North Public School, but everybody else moving into this particular area to help us manage the enrollment will be attending Wilfrid Jury, and that will be until a new school opens. Regarding the Sunningdale North holding zone, marked with the number 2 there, new families to that area will be attending University Heights Public School. Again, given the enrollment pressure that we're facing at Old North, it's just not a sustainable long-term solution for accommodating all new holding zone families from that area. Thanks.
Our next question is from Gus. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on how that number of 805 students was obtained. I'm a little bit confused by the fact that we know we have a number of 885 students as required, but at the same time, we know that when we open the school will be already over capacity. So I'm not sure I understand if we know that the school will be over capacity, why did we submit a case for 805 students? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the business case for this particular school was first submitted in 2019 as part of that round of the Capital Priorities Program. So at the time, certainly there was growth occurring in this part of the city. That growth has escalated considerably since then. Ultimately, the ministry did approve the business case for that size of a school. So at this point, our best approach here is to continue monitoring development activity and seeking new capital to help support the growth that's occurring here on a longer-term basis. But certainly, one of the criteria that the ministry looks at when they're reviewing business cases is they certainly want to make sure that students are there and present when new capital investment is made in the community. So at the time, back when the business case was being proposed, the 800 pupil place school was a strong business case and thus it received approval. But we do recognize that certainly the growth does not end there and we will need further capital in this area. So I hope that's helpful.
If there are any more questions, feel free to type in the chat or raise your hand. We have a question from Nisha. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So I was wondering, I mean, given all of what we've been hearing this evening and the timelines, I was wondering two questions. One is that, are we able to build on the Sir Arthur Currie location right now? Like, I mean, where the portables are we able to build there? And wouldn't that be faster, considering like the portables are like kind of one level, and if we were able to like kind of build a building or structure and a couple of classes there, would that be quicker and would require less capital perhaps? Like, is that an option?
Thanks for the question. Unfortunately, that is not an option for us. Any major capital projects, whether they are additions or new capital, require the permission of the province of Ontario. That happens only through a business case submission. So, really at this time, the province is looking at this saying, we've given you permission to build an 800 people place school. Now it's our responsibility to work with the community to try to secure land as quickly as possible, recognizing that that is taking far longer than anyone would wish it to. And we are recognizing greater pressure is coming at the community, and we're simply in a position now where we're going to continue to have to lobby and ask for permission from the province for more capital investment in this area, as well as many other areas of the City of London.
Our next question is from Andrew. Go ahead. Andrew, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. With all of this sort of, I mean, we're building 2 years behind every single time, and at least, if not 5 years behind. Is there any advocacy work we can do as AARC members with the province to help change the policy to help us plan better, so we're not playing catch up all the time in these developments, especially like we are right now?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Andrew. I think those would be great recommendations to make within your final AARC report. I think there's significant work that the community can be doing in partnership, whether both at a school board level, local government level, and a provincial government level to advocate for the needs of our community. There's certainly great, to your point, the process as it currently stands takes a long time to bring reality to the forefront. Neighborhoods are developing at a faster and faster rate. The province of Ontario is seeking ways to accelerate development in our communities, given the population growth that we're experiencing across the province. So I think there's tremendous opportunity for advocacy on both the amount of capital dollars available to communities in order to get this important infrastructure into our neighborhoods to support the kids in our communities, but also the speed at which the process takes place.
Okay, thank you.
Our next question is from Gus. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm not sure how the actual design of these schools take place. I assume there would be some architectural firm involved. But given the fact that we will start with a school overcapacity, that means that we will have portables in place. Would it be possible maybe at some point during the design process to find a way to make that modularity a little bit more suitable for the students? I am speaking of what they do in other jurisdictions. For example, in Alberta, when there's a portable, they actually attach it to the school. So from the inside of the school, you barely notice that you're actually entering a portable. which makes a big difference in terms of students circulating in the school and accessing some of the amenities. And it's just a question of that design process, if you could illuminate some. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Once we secure land, we do have a design process that we follow. That's fairly rigorous, and certainly it does require approval by the Ministry of Education before they'll sign off on the design. But certainly if there's recommendations that you as AARC members want to make regarding the design, there is certainly an opportunity to do that through the school community report that you will be preparing for trustees' consideration, and we'll certainly take that under advisement. Absolutely.
Our next question is from Xia Yan. Go ahead.
Yes, good evening, everybody. I currently located at the Sunningdale holding zone at Old North Public School on the number 2 on the screen. I just want to ask a question is, my understanding is that education cannot be a priority without the community also being a priority. As you can see, I live in London for more than 15 years. And last 4 years, we moved to this area. Just want to find a peaceful area and also find a good education system. At that time, we were told Ryerson will be our designated the public school for the kids. That's why we select this area. But now, looks like in 4 to 5 years later, this area will be moved into the proposed new London, West London public school system. I'm not saying I'm very disappointed. I'm just thinking this is going to force lots of people to move away from their area to try to find a more peaceful area or the more kind of priority area for the community. Have any bodies thinking about that kind of as a background for when you make the decision, just a conclusion thinking, okay, this is the area we're going to put everything together. Do not thinking anything background about the community background or the community priority background?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, we certainly recognize that student movement is never easy. Holding zones, when they're established, they're never intended to be permanent solutions. They're meant to be interim accommodations until more permanent accommodations are available for students. So certainly in the case of Old North Public School, that has been serving as the holding zone school for both the Fox Hollow West and the Sunningdale North holding zones. If there's any sort of legacy agreement recommendations that the school community wants to make as it relates to existing students, you can certainly do that through the school community report, and trustees will certainly take that under advisement as they deliberate and make decisions. But ultimately, this accommodation solution in this part of the city is a new school, and we have been approved for that by the province recently. So hope that is helpful.
Thank you.
If there are any other questions, feel free to type them in the chat or raise your hand.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us this evening. The next step in the attendance area review process is the holding of the school level AARC subcommittee meetings for the purposes of gathering public feedback regarding the boundary change options under consideration. The Thames Valley District School Board administrative team will be providing AARC members with a slide deck to include as part of their respective school level meetings, as well as a template document for meeting agendas, minutes, and a subcommittee report regarding the school community's input. Once again, we really appreciate everybody joining us this evening and for sharing your thoughts and your questions. And at this time, we thank you for taking this time and enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night, everyone.